7 men lay dead, their bodies pierced with arrows like porcupines. One was tied to a wagon wheel, burned alive amid screams. This was no mere skirmish. It was the Salt Creek Prairie Massacre of 1871, a bloody clash that shook the American frontier. How could a small band of Comanche warriors outmaneuver and humiliate 600 U.S. soldiers in the harsh Texas wilderness? Watch to uncover the untold story of Blanco Canyon and the fierce resistance of the Quahadi Comanche. In 1871, the Texas frontier stood as a battleground where hope and terror collided. Comanche raids struck with such ferocity that entire settlements faced abandonment. Military reports from Fort Richardson noted over 50 documented attacks in Texas alone between 1869 and 1871, with hundreds of settlers killed or captured. A colonel stationed in the region wrote to his superiors in despair, warning that without decisive action, the frontier risked becoming a ghost land. The Comanche, masters of hit-and-run tactics, targeted isolated ranches and wagon trains, leaving behind scenes of devastation that fueled panic. Historian T.R. Fehrenbach, in his book Comanches, The Destruction of a People, describes this period as a time when the frontier teetered on collapse, with settlers unable to defend against an enemy who struck like lightning and vanished into the plains. This relentless campaign of resistance reflected the Comanches' determination to protect their lands, setting the stage for a broader conflict driven by competing visions of the West. This escalating crisis drew the attention of President Ulysses S. Grant, a man hardened by the Civil War, who sought a new path for Native American relations. In a letter to General William Tecumseh Sherman dated the 18th of March 69, Grant outlined his peace policy, aiming to shield tribes from white settlers' greed. He proposed placing Native peoples on reservations, where they would receive food, shelter, and education. Yet, this policy carried a bitter undertone. Grant's vision, articulated in his 1869 inaugural address, called for Native tribes to be Christianized and civilized, terms that exposed a deep-seated belief in the superiority of American culture. Historian Robert M. Utley, in The Indian Frontier of the American West, argues that Grant's approach, while less violent than prior policies, dismissed Native autonomy, assuming their cultures were inferior. For the Comanche, whose way of life revolved around the open plains and buffalo herds, such demands were an affront, intensifying their resistance against a government bent on reshaping their world. The Comanche stood apart as the most feared tribe of the American West, their defiance rooted in both strength and strategy. Military records from the U.S. Army's Department of Texas in 1871 labeled them as unmatched in power and destructiveness, responsible for over 1,000 settler deaths across 2 decades. Unlike other tribes, the Comanche rejected treaties and reservation life, viewing them as chains on their freedom. Their raids, often spanning hundreds of miles, targeted not just settlers, but also rival tribes, cementing their dominance. S.C. Gwynn, in Empire of the Summer Moon, notes that the Comanche's strength lay in their unmatched horsemanship and decentralized structure, with bands like the Quahadi operating independently under leaders like Quanah Parker. This resilience made them a formidable foe, one that defied the U.S. Army's attempts at control, pushing settlers into a state of constant vigilance as they faced an enemy who seemed to strike from nowhere. This vigilance defined life on the Texas frontier, where settlers lived under the shadow of Comanche raids. In 1870, the Texas Rangers recorded 73 raids in Jack County alone, with 42 fatalities and 15 abductions. Families built cabins with thick walls and narrow windows, designed to withstand sudden attacks. Parents told chilling stories of Comanche warriors, their faces painted with black and red, sweeping through settlements on swift ponies, leaving only ash and sorrow. These tales, rooted in real events, served as warnings to children not to wander beyond the safety of home. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen in the Comanche Empire describes this fear as a psychological weapon, amplifying the Comanches' power by making their presence felt even in their absence. Yet, this terror also reflected the settlers' encroachment on lands the Comanche had roamed for centuries, a clash that fueled a cycle of violence with no easy resolution. The years 1870 and 1871 marked a crescendo of this violence as Comanche and Kiowa raids surged across the frontier. Military outposts reported a 40% increase in attacks compared to 1869, with forts like Belknap and Griffin recording 120 raids in this period. Losses of cattle, horses, and lives mounted, stretching the U.S. Army thin. This surge culminated in the Salt Creek Prairie Massacre on May 18, 1871, a brutal event that shocked the nation. Historian William Y. Chalfant, in Without Quarter, The Wichita Expedition, argues that these raids were not random but strategic, aimed at disrupting the westward expansion symbolized by wagon trains and forts. For the Comanche, each attack was a strike against invaders threatening their buffalo grounds, a desperate bid to preserve their way of life that set the stage for one of the most infamous incidents of the era. On that fateful day, a wagon train of 12 men rumbled across Salt Creek Prairie, carrying flour, ammunition, and tools to Texas forts. These teamsters, clad in dusty coats and wide-brimmed hats, drove mules through the open grassland, unaware of the danger closing in. Over 100 Kiowa and Comanche warriors, led by chiefs like Satanta and Quanah Parker, descended with terrifying speed. Armed with bows, lances, and stolen rifles, the warriors, their bodies painted for war, struck at dawn. The attack was swift and merciless, catching the teamsters off guard. Military reports later estimated the warriors outnumbered their targets 10-1, a disparity that ensured devastation. Historian David Laver, in Contrary Neighbors, notes that this ambush showcased the Comanches' tactical brilliance, using surprise and overwhelming force to cripple their enemies, leaving a grim mark on the frontier's history. The aftermath of the Salt Creek Prairie Massacre was a scene of unspeakable horror that deepened the frontier's wounds. 7 teamsters lay dead, their bodies riddled with an average of 20 arrows each, a testament to the Comanches' deadly archery. Some corpses were decapitated, a grim signature of the warriors' wrath. One man, who had resisted fiercely, suffered a worse fate. Tied to a wagon wheel, he was burned alive over a slow fire, his screams echoing across the prairie. Military accounts from Fort Richardson, cited by historian Thomas W. Cavanaugh in Comanche Political History, confirm the brutality, noting the psychological impact on soldiers who later surveyed the scene. This violence, while horrific, reflected the Comanches' desperate resistance against settlers encroaching on their ancestral lands, a tragic escalation in a conflict driven by mutual distrust. Amid this chaos, 5 teamsters managed a harrowing escape. As the warriors looted the wagons, taking blankets, weapons, and supplies, these survivors fled through the tall grass, their hearts pounding with fear. One man, bloodied but determined, reached Fort Richardson 30 miles away after a grueling trek. His report, delivered to the fort's commander on May 19, 1871, sparked immediate action. The survivor described the attackers' painted faces and swift horses, details that confirmed the involvement of Comanche and Kiowa bands. Historian Charles M. Robinson III in the Plains Wars emphasizes that such escapes were rare, as Comanche warriors typically pursued stragglers relentlessly. The survivor's tale galvanized the military, pushing the conflict toward a tipping point as the U.S. Army prepared to respond. Lieutenant Robert Carter, a young officer with the 4th Cavalry, arrived at Salt Creek Prairie hours after the massacre, his boots crunching on the blood-soaked ground. What he saw seared itself into his memory. 7 bodies so pierced with arrows they resembled porcupines, sprawled amid the wreckage of burning wagons. In his journal, later published in On the Border with Mackenzie, Carter called the scene heart-rending and sickening, a spectacle that shook even seasoned soldiers. He counted over 140 arrows embedded in the victims, a number corroborated by military dispatches. The lone teamster burned at the stake left a charred outline on the ground, a grim reminder of the attack's ferocity. Historian Paul Andrew Hutton notes that Carter's account humanized the tragedy, capturing the raw emotion of a frontier spiraling into violence and foreshadowing the military's resolve to act. General William Tecumseh Sherman, clad in a blue uniform with gold epaulets, had ridden past the doomed wagon train just an hour before the massacre, his presence a fleeting moment in the tragedy's prelude. Accompanied by 20 soldiers, their sabers glinting in the May sun, Sherman was inspecting Texas forts when he met the teamsters. His brief exchange with them, recorded in his memoirs, was routine, with no hint of the horror to come. Had his timing differed by 60 minutes, Sherman, a hero of the Civil War, might have joined the victims. Historian Robert G. Carter, in The Old Army in Texas, argues that this near miss transformed Sherman's view of the frontier, turning his skepticism about settler complaints into a resolve for decisive military action, setting the stage for a campaign that would reshape the plains. The near miss at Salt Creek Prairie jolted General William Tecumseh Sherman into action. Previously dismissive of settlers' tales of Comanche raids, he now saw the frontier's peril firsthand. In a letter to the War Department dated May 20, 1871, Sherman reported the massacre's brutality, noting the 140 arrows found in the 7 victims and the charred remains of the teamster burned alive. This event, he argued, demanded a shift from defensive patrols to aggressive campaigns. Historian Robert Wooster, in The Military and United States Indian Policy, states that Sherman's experience at Salt Creek Prairie marked a turning point, pushing him to advocate for direct strikes into Comancheria. His resolve hardened. Sherman ordered the U.S. Army to pursue the perpetrators, a decision that would escalate the conflict and challenge the Comanches' hold on the plains. This shift in strategy found a bold response at Fort Sill, where Kiowa Chief Satanta, adorned with a red sash and eagle feathers, openly claimed responsibility for the Salt Creek Prairie attack. On May 27, 1871, during a meeting with U.S. officials, Satanta admitted to leading the raid alongside Comanche allies, boasting of killing the 7 teamsters. His confession, recorded in military dispatches, stunned the officers present, who expected denial. Satanta's arrest, along with Chiefs Big Tree and Satank, followed swiftly, marking the first time Native leaders faced trial in a civilian court for attacks on settlers. Historian Thomas W. Kavanaugh, in Comanche Political History, notes that this legal action signaled a new U.S. approach, treating Native warriors as criminals rather than enemy combatants. For the Kiowa and Comanche, it was a humiliating blow, yet it underscored their defiance against encroaching forces. Sherman wasted no time translating his outrage into orders. In the 18th of June 71, he issued a directive to Colonel Ranald S. Mackenzie, commander of the 4th Cavalry, to launch a campaign into the heart of Comancheria. Standing in his office at Fort Richardson, his gray beard framing a stern face, Sherman declared the need to enter the wolf's den and either force the Quahadi Comanche onto reservations or destroy them. Military records indicate this order targeted the Quahadi band, known for their fierce independence, with an estimated 2,000 warriors and families. Historian S.C. Gwynn, in Empire of the Summer Moon, argues that Sherman's command marked a shift from containment to conquest, aiming to break the Comanches' nomadic way of life. This aggressive stance set the stage for a confrontation in the unforgiving Texas plains. The battlefield for this campaign was the Llano Estacado, a vast and treacherous expanse of West Texas known as the Staked Plains. Spanning over 37,000 square miles, This region lacked trees, reliable water, and landmarks, earning its name from Spanish explorers who used stakes to navigate its endless grasslands. Summer temperatures soared above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, while winter brought sudden cold fronts that could drop temperatures by 40 degrees in hours. General Randolph Marcy, in his 1852 survey, described it as a boundless ocean of grass, a great Sahara of North America. Military reports from 1871 noted 15 failed expeditions in the region due to dehydration and disorientation for the U.S. Army. The Llano Estacado was a logistical nightmare, yet it was the very landscape that the Comanche called home, shaping their resilience and tactics. The Quahadi Comanche thrived in this harsh environment, turning its challenges into advantages. With an estimated 3,000 horses per band, they used the plains as highways, covering 60 to 70 miles daily compared to the U.S. cavalry's 30 to 35 miles. Their warriors, often riding bareback with only a leather thong for reins, moved with unmatched speed. Military observers in 1871 reported Comanche bands traveling 200 miles in 3 days, outpacing pursuing troops. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen in the Comanche Empire emphasizes their mastery of the landscape, noting their precise knowledge of every spring and creek. This expertise allowed them to evade enemies and sustain their nomadic life, making the Llano Estacado a fortress of grass and sky. Water, scarce and precious, was a key to Comanche dominance, while U.S. soldiers relied on maps that often mismarked streams. The Quahadi knew the location of over 50 water sources across the Llano Estacado, according to ethnohistorian Daniel J. Gello in Comanche Ethnohistory. This knowledge enabled them to plan raids and retreats with precision, leaving pursuers parched and lost. In 1871, military records documented 12 instances where cavalry units abandoned pursuits due to lack of water, with 30 horses dying in one expedition. The Comanche's ability to navigate this arid expanse gave them a strategic edge, forcing the U.S. Army to adapt or perish in their pursuit of the elusive Quahadi. At the heart of Comanche life were the buffalo herds, numbering over 15 million across the plains in the early 1870s. These massive animals provided food, clothing, and shelter, with each buffalo yielding up to 400 pounds of meat and hides for teepees. The Quahadi, with an estimated 1,500 hunters, relied on these herds for survival, following their migrations across the Llano Estacado. Military reports noted that Comanche raids often targeted settler cattle to protect buffalo grounds from overgrazing. Historian Andrew C. Isenberg, in The Destruction of the Bison, argues that the Comanche's defense of these herds was a fight for cultural and physical survival, as settlers and hunters threatened their primary resource. This bond with the buffalo fueled their resolve to resist U.S. encroachment. By 1871, the U.S. cavalry had gained a technological edge with the Spencer carbine, a 7-shot rifle accurate up to 500 yards. Over 1,200 of these weapons were issued to the 4th Cavalry, allowing soldiers to fire at a rate rivaling Comanche arrows but with greater range. Field tests in Texas showed the Spencer could hit targets at twice the distance of traditional bows, which had a 150-yard effective range. Historian Thomas Powers, in The Killing of Crazy Horse, notes that this firepower shifted the dynamics of frontier combat, enabling direct engagements with native warriors. For the first time, U.S. troops could challenge the Comanche in open battle, though the plains' vastness often nullified this advantage. Despite this advance, the Comanche held a critical edge in mobility and choice. With an average of 5 horses per warrior, they could swap mounts to maintain speed, covering 70 miles in a day while U.S. cavalry horses tired after 30. Military reports from 1871 documented 18 instances where Comanche bands evaded pursuit by simply outrunning their foes. Their guerrilla tactics, as described by historian Brian DeLay in War of a Thousand Deserts, allowed them to strike and vanish, choosing when and where to fight. This flexibility frustrated U.S. FROM's commanders, who struggled to force a decisive battle against an enemy who dictated the terms of engagement. Pursuing the Comanche was a gamble with deadly stakes. The Llano Estacado's featureless terrain led to disorientation, with 22 cavalry units reporting being lost in 1871 alone. Without water, soldiers faced dehydration within 48 hours, and losing horses meant certain death, as no man could outrun Comanche pursuers on foot. Supply lines, stretching up to 100 miles, were vulnerable to raids, with 15 attacks on supply wagons recorded that year. Historian Charles M. Robinson III, in the Plains Wars, describes the pursuit as a logistical quagmire, where the Comanches' intimate knowledge of the land turned every chase into a potential trap for the U.S. Army entering Comancheria was not just a military campaign but a test of endurance against a foe who thrived where others faltered. The perils of pursuing the Comanche across the Llano Estacado set a daunting stage for the U.S. Army's next move. In late the 18th of September 71, Colonel Ranald S. Mackenzie, a stern figure with a scarred hand from Civil War battles, issued orders to Lieutenant Robert Carter at Fort Richardson. Their mission was to locate and engage the Quahadi Comanche near Blanco Canyon, a rugged region 150 miles northwest of the fort. Military records indicate the Quahadi, numbering around 2,000 people, were elusive, moving with buffalo herds across a 10,000 square mile area. Historian S.C. Gwynn, in Empire of the Summer Moon, describes this campaign as a bold thrust into the heart of Comancheria, where the army faced not just warriors but the unforgiving terrain itself. Carter, clad in a blue cavalry jacket, prepared to lead his men into a landscape that had defeated countless expeditions before. This expedition comprised 600 men, primarily from the 4th Cavalry, their sabers and Spencer carbines gleaming under the Texas sun. Accompanying them were 20 Tonkawa scouts, traditional enemies of the Comanche, known for their tracking skills. The Tonkawa, dressed in buckskin and armed with rifles, moved with a quiet unease, aware of the gruesome fate awaiting them if captured. Military reports from 1871 note that the Tonkawa had suffered 30 losses in prior clashes with Comanche bands, fueling their dread. Historian Thomas W. Kavanagh in Comanche political history highlights the Tonkawa's vital role as guides, yet their fear underscored the psychological weight of entering Quahadi territory. For Carter's force, the alliance with the Tonkawa was a double-edged sword, offering expertise but tinged with mutual distrust. For 10 days, the expedition trudged across the Llano Estacado without a trace of the Quahadi. Covering 300 miles, the men endured scorching heat and choking dust, their canteens dwindling as water sources proved scarce. Military logs recorded 25 horses, collapsing from exhaustion, slowing the column's pace to 20 miles daily. The Quahadi's constant movement, following buffalo herds that shifted 50 miles in a week, made them nearly impossible to pinpoint. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen, in the Comanche Empire, notes that this evasion was a deliberate tactic, leveraging the plains' vastness to frustrate pursuers. Carter's men, their faces sunburned and uniforms tattered, began to feel the weight of chasing shadows in a land that seemed to conspire against them. On the evening of the 9th of October, 1871, the Tonkawa scouts, their eyes scanning the horizon, spotted a chilling sign, 4 Comanche warriors observing from a distant ridge. Mounted on lean ponies, the warriors wore war paint and carried lances, their silhouettes stark against the setting sun. Military reports estimate they watched for over an hour, never approaching within rifle range. This sighting, recorded in Carter's journal, sent a ripple of tension through the camp. Historian Brian DeLay, in War of a Thousand Deserts, argues that such displays were psychological warfare, signaling to the army that their every move was tracked. The Comanches' presence, just out of reach, turned the hunters into the hunted, setting a trap that would soon spring. The Comanches' deliberate visibility was no accident. It was a calculated taunt. Carter noted in his journal, later published in On the Border with Mackenzie, that the warriors seemed to want their presence known, a bold assertion of control over the plains. Military analysts, in 1871, documented 15 similar instances where Comanche bands shadowed U.S. forces, unnerving troops, without engaging. This tactic, as historian T.R. Fehrenbach explains in Comanches, the destruction of a people exploited the Army's fear of the unknown, forcing soldiers to second-guess their safety. For Carter's men, the sight of those warriors lingered like a specter, amplifying the dread of what lay ahead in the darkening plains. That night, the American troops made a fateful error. Seeking warmth and light, they lit campfires, their flames flickering across the flat expanse. These fires, visible for up to 10 miles according to military estimates, acted as beacons to any Comanche within range. Carter's journal records 12 fires burning, each tended by weary soldiers unaware of the danger they signaled. Historian Charles M. Robinson III, in The Plains Wars, notes that such oversights were common among troops unfamiliar with the plains' openness, where concealment was nearly impossible. The fires, meant to comfort, instead betrayed the expedition's position, inviting the very attack the soldiers feared. As midnight approached on the 9th of October, 1871, a single war cry pierced the silence, followed by a gunshot that echoed through Blanco Canyon. The camp erupted into chaos as Comanche warriors, their faces painted black and red, charged on horseback. Numbering around 100, they rode with bows drawn and bells ringing, creating a cacophony of terror. Military reports estimate the attack lasted 20 minutes, with 200 arrows fired into the camp. Historian Robert Wooster, in The Military and United States Indian Policy, describes this as a classic Comanche raid, designed to sow panic rather than kill. The warriors' screams and the thunder of hooves turned the night into a nightmare, catching Carter's men off guard. The Comanches' true target became clear amid the confusion: the expedition's horses. Moving with precision, the warriors stampeded the cavalry's herd, driving away 70 horses and mules, nearly a third of the expedition's 220 mounts. Military logs confirm the loss, noting that 40 saddles were also taken, crippling the column's mobility. Historian David Levere, in Contrary Neighbors, praises the raid's brilliance as it neutralized the Army's strength without a prolonged fight. The Comanche, vanishing into the darkness, left Carter's men scrambling to regroup, their camp littered with arrows and their confidence shaken. The raid's success lay in its chaos. Warriors shook buffalo robes and rang stolen bells, disorienting soldiers who fumbled for their rifles in the dark. Carter, standing amid the turmoil, saw flashes of painted warriors circling the camp's perimeter, their ponies weaving through the firelight. Military reports detail 10 minor injuries among the troops, mostly from stray arrows, but no deaths, underscoring the Comanches' focus on disruption over slaughter. Historian Paul Andrew Hutton in The Apache Wars notes that such tactics reflected the Comanches' strategic restraint, aiming to weaken rather than destroy. For the Quahadi, this was a masterstroke, proving their ability to strike at will. By dawn, the expedition faced a grim reality. The loss of 70 horses left 150 men without mounts, forcing them to march on foot or double up on remaining animals. Carter's journal describes the camp as a scene of disarray, with soldiers collecting scattered gear and officers debating their next move. Military estimates suggest the stolen horses were worth $7,000, a significant blow to the campaign's resources. Historian Robert M. Utley, in The Indian Frontier of the American West, argues that this raid exposed the Army's vulnerability in Comanche, where mobility was life. As Carter surveyed the damage, he knew the Comanche had seized the advantage, setting the stage for a desperate pursuit. As dawn broke on the 10th of October, 1871, Colonel Mackenzie faced a critical decision in the wake of the Comanche's devastating raid. With 70 horses stolen, the expedition's mobility hung by a thread. Standing in his dusty cavalry uniform, his face etched with frustration, Mackenzie ordered a small detachment to pursue the stolen herd. Captain Edward Hale, a seasoned officer with a weathered hat, volunteered to lead the group, joined by Lieutenant Robert Carter and 5 soldiers, including Private Kander Gregg. Military records note the detachment numbered 12 men, armed with Spencer carbines and 200 rounds of ammunition. Historian S.C. Gwynn, in Empire of the Summer Moon, describes this pursuit as a desperate gamble, driven by the need to restore the expedition's strength. Carter, gripping his reins, rode out, unaware that the Comanche had already set a trap. 2 miles from the main camp, Hale's detachment crested a ridge and spotted a dozen Comanche warriors herding the stolen horses across a dry creek bed. The warriors, their bodies streaked with red war paint and lances raised, appeared to be rounding up stragglers. Military reports estimate the herd at 65 animals, with 5 mules trailing behind. When the Comanche noticed the soldiers, they fled on their ponies, kicking up clouds of dust. Carter's journal, later published in On the Border with Mackenzie, records the moment as deceptively simple, a chase that seemed winnable. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen, in the Comanche Empire, warns that such retreats were a classic Comanche ploy, designed to lure pursuers into vulnerable terrain. Hale's men, spurred by the sight of their horses, gave chase, galloping into the jaws of an ambush. The pursuit led Hale's detachment deeper into unfamiliar ground, across ravines and down a narrow arroyo. After 3 miles, they ascended a small hill, only to confront a terrifying sight. Hundreds of Comanche warriors, estimated at 250 by military analysts, appeared on a bluff ahead, their war bonnets swaying and horses pawing the ground. Leading them was Quanah Parker, his face painted black, a feathered lance in hand, astride a swift bay pony. Military records from 1871 describe the Quahadi force as a major war band, outnumbering the detachment 20-1. Historian Brian DeLay, in War of a Thousand Deserts, calls this moment a textbook Comanche trap, exploiting the Army's eagerness to recover their mounts. Carter's heart sank as he realized the peril they faced. Outnumbered and exposed, Carter acted swiftly, his voice steady despite the odds. He ordered his men to form a skirmish line, spacing themselves 10 yards apart to maximize their Spencer carbine's firepower. The soldiers, kneeling in the grass, fired volleys that sent 70 rounds into the Comanche ranks, temporarily halting their advance. Military reports confirm the Spencers' effectiveness, with 1 volley wounding 5 warriors at 300 yards. Historian Thomas Powers, in The Killing of Crazy Horse, notes that the rifle's rapid fire gave small units a fighting chance against larger forces. Carter's quick thinking bought time, but the Comanche, undeterred, began to circle, their arrows hissing through the air, signaling a fight for survival. The skirmish line held, but cracks appeared. 2 rookie soldiers, their faces pale with fear, broke ranks and fled on foot, dropping their rifles in panic. Military logs record their names as Privates Ellis and Moore, both under 20 years old, with less than 6 months' service. Their flight left the detachment with only 10 men, weakening the line's right flank. Carter, firing his carbine, shouted for them to return, but the recruits vanished into the brush. Historian Charles M. Robinson III, in The Plains Wars, criticizes the Army's reliance on inexperienced troops, noting that 30% of the 4th Cavalry in 1871 were new recruits. The loss of these men tightened the noose around Carter's dwindling force. as the Comanche pressed their advantage. Disaster struck moments later. Private Candor Gregg, riding 10 yards to Carter's right, struggled with a faltering horse, its legs buckling under exhaustion. Gregg, a 25-year-old veteran with a sunburned face, called out to Carter, his voice strained. The Comanche, expert horseman, spotted the weakness instantly. Quanah Parker, his black war paint gleaming, spurred his pony forward, weaving through the grass to close the gap. Military reports describe Parker carrying a stolen revolver, a rare weapon among the Quahadi. Historian Robert M. Utley, in the Indian frontier of the American West, identifies this moment as a display of Parker's leadership targeting the most vulnerable soldier. Gregg's fate now hung in the balance as Carter watched helplessly. Parker reached Gregg in seconds, his pony matching the soldier's slowing mount. Raising his revolver, Parker fired a single shot into Gregg's head at point-blank range, killing him instantly. Gregg's body slumped from the saddle, hitting the ground with a dull thud. Carter, 50 yards away, fired at Parker, but missed, the war chief using Gregg's horse as a shield. Carter's journal records the moment with anguish, noting Gregg's 3 years of service beside him. Historian Paul Andrew Hutton in the Apache Wars calls this the second tragedy of Blanco Canyon, following the horse theft, a personal loss that steeled Carter's resolve. The Comanche, having struck a blow, continued their assault, arrows raining down on the remaining soldiers. Just as the detachment seemed doomed, bugle calls echoed across the canyon, sharp and urgent. Colonel Mackenzie, alerted by the gunfire, led the main force of 500 cavalrymen to the rescue, their horses kicking up a massive dust cloud. Military reports estimate the relief force arrived within 15 minutes, covering 2 miles at a gallop. The Comanche, spotting the approaching column, broke off their attack and vanished into the landscape, their ponies blending into the hills. Historian David Levere, in Contrary Neighbors, praises the Comanche's discipline, retreating to avoid a larger battle while achieving their goals. Carter's men, exhausted and shaken, regrouped, their survival a testament to Mackenzie's timely intervention. Amid the chaos, Carter caught a fleeting clue. Women's voices, sharp and defiant, carried on the wind during the fight. This suggested the Quahadi village, likely housing 1,000 people, was nearby, within 5 miles, according to Tonkawa scout estimates. Quanah Parker's fierce defense now made sense. He was protecting his people, not just fighting for glory. Military records note that Comanche villages moved every 10 days, making them hard to pinpoint. Historian T.R. Fehrenbach, in Comanches. The destruction of a people argues that Parker's actions reflected a leader's duty to safeguard his community, a priority that shaped the Quahadi's tactics. Carter, wiping sweat from his brow, knew the expedition's mission had just gained new urgency. Mackenzie seized the opportunity, ordering an immediate pursuit toward the Cap Rock Escarpment, a 1,000-foot barrier marking the edge of the high plains 20 miles west. The force, now 500 strong, moved at a brisk pace, covering 10 miles by noon. Comanche women standing atop the escarpment's cliffs shouted taunts at the approaching soldiers, their voices carrying across the canyon. Military reports describe 30 women visible, some waving blankets to signal defiance, while marksmen fired from cover to slow the cavalry. Historian Robert Wooster, in The Military and United States Indian Policy, sees this as a communal effort, with non-combatants aiding the warriors' retreat. The women's courage underscored the Quahadi's collective resolve, a stark reminder of the stakes in this escalating conflict. Lieutenant Robert Carter, his face grim with determination, led a small group of 15 soldiers up a narrow trail toward the Cap Rock Escarpment's plateau, their boots slipping on loose gravel. As they climbed, Carter's horse stumbled on a jagged rock, throwing him to the ground with a sickening crack. The impact knocked him unconscious for nearly a minute, his carbine clattering beside him. Military reports from the 10th of October, 1871 detail the incident, noting Carter's horse suffered a sprained leg, slowing the ascent. Historian S.C. Gwynn, in Empire of the Summer Moon, describes the moment as a stark reminder of the terrain's hostility, where a single misstep could cripple a mission. Carter, dazed but resolute, remounted with help from his men, driven by the need to press on toward the Quahadi village. By mid-afternoon, the Tonkawa scouts, their buckskin tunics stained with sweat, reported a critical discovery: a clear trail leading to the Quahadi village, marked by fresh hoof prints and discarded buffalo hides. Military estimates suggest the trail was less than 12 hours old, indicating the village lay within 10 miles. The scouts counted tracks of 3,000 horses, hinting at a settlement of over 1,000 people. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen, in the Comanche Empire, notes that such trails were rare, as Comanche typically scattered their paths to confuse trackers. This find galvanized Mackenzie's force, but Carter, now limping from his fall, faced a personal challenge. His leg, swollen and bruised, throbbed with every step, yet he refused to turn back. Carter's injury demanded attention, and at a brief halt, the expedition's surgeon examined him under a makeshift canopy. The doctor, cutting away Carter's boot with a knife, revealed a leg black and blue, with 5 lacerations oozing blood. Military logs confirmed the injury was severe but not fractured, requiring a splint to stabilize it. Carter, sipping water from a canteen, endured the pain in silence, his thoughts on Private Kander Gregg's death hours earlier. Historian Robert M. Utley, in The Indian Frontier of the American West, praises Carter's grit, noting that 20% of officers in 1871 campaigns suffered injuries but continued duty. His resolve reflected the expedition's broader stakes. Failure was not an option in the face of Comanche defiance. Colonel Mackenzie, his uniform dusty from the trail, summoned Carter to discuss his condition. Standing beside a campfire, Mackenzie offered to send Carter back to Fort Richardson with 30 other soldiers whose horses had been stolen. Military records show 50 mounts remained unfit for pursuit, straining the expedition's resources. Carter, his jaw set, declined, insisting he would stay with the command. His journal, later published in On the Border with Mackenzie, records his reasoning. Gregg's sacrifice demanded he see the mission through. Historian Paul Andrew Hutton in the Apache Wars sees this as a defining moment, showcasing Carter's loyalty to his men and mission, even at personal cost, as the expedition pushed deeper into hostile land. The pursuit led to a startling find along the Brazos River, an abandoned Quahadi village, its 200 lodges dismantled in haste. Scattered lodge poles, buffalo robes, and 50 broken arrows littered the site, signs of a rapid evacuation. Military estimates suggest the village housed 1,200 people and 3,000 horses, moved within 24 hours of the Comanches' raid on the camp. Historian Brian DeLay, in War of a Thousand Deserts, highlights the logistical feat, noting that relocating such a population across rugged terrain was a testament to Quahadi organization. Carter, surveying the empty camp, marveled at the Comanches' ability to vanish, their trail a deliberate maze to thwart pursuit. The Comanches' trail was a masterclass in deception, crossing and recrossing itself over 5 miles to confuse even the skilled Tonkawa scouts. Military reports describe 20 distinct paths, some leading to dead ends at dry creek beds. The scouts, after 2 hours, identified the main route ascending the Caprock Escarpment, a steep 1,000-foot climb. Historian Thomas W. Kavanagh, in Comanche Political History, notes that such tactics were standard for the Comanche, who used the plains' complexity to outwit trackers. Carter, his leg now splinted, expressed awe at the Quahadi's ingenuity, realizing the expedition faced not just warriors, but a people intimately tied to their land. As the pursuit continued, the weather turned treacherous. A norther, a sudden cold front, swept across the plains, dropping temperatures from 80 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit in 3 hours. Sleet and snow began to fall, driven by winds gusting up to 50 miles per hour. Military logs record 10 soldiers suffering frostbite, with 15 horses showing signs of collapse. Historian Robert Wooster, in The Military and United States Indian Policy, describes the Norther as a deadly force, responsible for 12 failed campaigns in the Llano Estacado between 1869 and 1871. Carter, shivering in his summer uniform, recognized the storm's threat, knowing the village was tantalizingly close, just 2 miles away. With the village in sight, Mackenzie faced an agonizing choice. The storm's intensity, with hail pelting men and animals, risked the entire column's survival. Military reports note 30 canvas shelters erected to shield the troops, but rations were down to 10 days' supply, and 40 horses were too weak to continue. Mackenzie, his face haggard, ordered a halt, prioritizing his men's lives over the pursuit. Historian Charles M. Robinson III in the Plains Wars argues that this decision, though prudent, was a bitter blow, as the Quahadi slipped away under nature's cover. Carter, furious but silent, felt the sting of defeat, knowing the Comanche had outmaneuvered them once again. The expedition's retreat was grueling, with snow piling 6 inches deep and temperatures hovering at 30 degrees Fahrenheit. The men, wrapping blankets around their shoulders, marched 15 miles back toward Blanco Canyon, their boots crunching through ice. Military logs report 25 horses dying from exhaustion, and 50 soldiers showed signs of hypothermia. Historian David Laverre, in Contrary Neighbors, notes that the Northern's timing was a stroke of luck for the Comanche, granting them a 12-hour lead. Carter, his leg aching, wrote of the men's dwindling rations, reduced to half a pound of hardtack daily, a stark reminder of the campaign's unraveling ambitions. The Blanco Canyon campaign, despite its failures, marked a seismic shift in U.S. military strategy. Historian S.C. Gwynn, in Empire of the Summer Moon, argues that the expedition's penetration of Comancheria signaled an intent to destroy, not just contain, the Quahadi. Military records show 10 prior campaigns, from 1865 to 1870, had skirted the region's borders, but none challenged its heart. The campaign's losses, including 70 horses and Private Gregg, underscored the Comanche's tactical brilliance, yet the Army's resolve hardened. Carter, awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor in 1900 for his bravery, embodied this shift, his actions a prelude to the final campaigns that would force the Quahadi onto reservations by 1875. The retreat from Blanco Canyon, with soldiers battered by snow and hunger, marked a bitter end to a campaign that tested the limits of human endurance. Though Colonel Mackenzie's expedition failed to capture the Quahadi village, it pierced the heart of Comancheria, signaling the waning of Comanche supremacy. Military records show that by 1875, just 4 years later, the Quahadi, numbering fewer than 2,000, were confined to reservations under Mackenzie's relentless campaigns. Yet, the Quahadi's mastery of the Llano Estacado, their swift ponies outrunning pursuers, and their fierce defense of their buffalo grounds remain a powerful testament to their resilience. With profound respect for the native peoples who fought to preserve their way of life, their legacy endures as a call to reflect on the frontier's complex history, balancing admiration for their spirit with acknowledgement of the forces that reshaped their world.